There is a question that every intelligence agency asks after a catastrophic failure. Not what went wrong. That question comes later. The first question is simpler and far more unsettling. Who was in the room? Not a physical room, the room of trust. The circle of people, or accounts, or handlers, or cover names that an operative believed were safe. Because when a network collapses the way Iran's European network collapsed, the failure is never just technical. It is personal. Someone trusted the wrong thing. Someone stopped asking the question they should have kept asking. And in this case, that thing was a message. 12 words, sent at 2:47 in the morning on a platform that was supposed to be secure, from a handler who was supposed to be real. The message was neither of those things. His name in this story is Daniel. That is not his real name, and the details of his life have been adjusted in ways that protect what still needs protecting. But the shape of his life, the architecture of how he ended up where he ended up, that part is real enough to matter. Daniel was 34 years old, Iranian-Austrian dual national. He lived in Vienna, in the 16th district, in an apartment that was small but organized. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a pharmaceutical distribution company, the kind of job that gives you access to movement databases, freight schedules, shipping manifests, the kind of job that looks, from the outside, like exactly what it is. He played football on weekends. He called his mother in Tehran every Sunday evening. He had been seeing a woman, quietly and without much certainty, for about 8 months. She had recently moved to Berlin for work, and that distance was becoming a problem he did not know how to solve. He also carried a second phone, and almost no one in his life knew that. The recruitment had happened 3 years earlier, and it had happened the way these things almost always happen now, not through ideology, not through blackmail, not through some dramatic approach in a parking garage. It happened through a message, a telegram message, from an account that appeared to belong to a distant acquaintance from his university years in Tehran. A casual question, a catching up, then another message a week later, then a meeting for coffee that felt entirely normal, then an offer, then money, then a task so simple it barely registered as a line being crossed. Photograph the exterior of a building near Vienna's diplomatic quarter. That was it. No explanation, no context. Just the building, from a public street, on a Tuesday afternoon. The money arrived in a crypto wallet the same evening. And here's the thing about that first task. It is designed to feel like nothing, because it is nothing, in isolation. You are not handing over secrets. You are not betraying anyone. You are taking a photograph of a building that anyone could walk past and photograph. The task is not the point. The task is the first step on a staircase where each individual step is small enough to seem reversible, until you are high enough that looking down becomes the problem. By the time the tasks stopped being small, Daniel had already climbed further than he understood. His handler was known to him only as Karim. They had never spoken by voice. Daniel had never seen his face. Everything, every instruction, every payment confirmation, every check-in, moved through a single Telegram account. Karim's messages were always brief, always in the informal Farsi of someone roughly Daniel's age, always precise without being cold. Over 3 years, Daniel had come to think of Karim as someone he knew. Not a friend, not exactly, but a consistent presence. Someone who answered when Daniel checked in, who acknowledged completed tasks without excessive praise, who occasionally sent a message that was purely logistical, a time window, a location, a name, and nothing more. That consistency is not an accident, it is a construction. Handlers are trained to build that sense of reliable presence because reliable presence is the infrastructure of operational compliance. An asset who trusts the routine will continue the routine. An asset who starts to doubt the routine becomes a liability. Daniel trusted the routine. And then, 8 months before this story reaches its most consequential moment, Karim went silent. Not immediately, obviously absent. These things rarely announce themselves. The first week of silence, Daniel assumed a delay. Technical, administrative. The second week, he sent a check-in message and received no response. The third week, he sent another. Nothing. He had, at that point, a partially completed task sitting on his end. A request that had come in 2 weeks before the silence started. Information about the movement patterns of a European logistics contractor with connections to a sanctions monitoring body. Daniel had pulled partial data from his work databases but needed confirmation on a specific detail before he compiled the final report. He could not complete it without Karim, and he could not ask Karim because Karim was not there. What do you do when you are 3 years into a covert arrangement and your handler disappears? You cannot ask anyone. You cannot file a complaint. You cannot send the information to someone else because you do not know anyone else. The entire architecture of the network is designed so that you do not know anyone else. Compartmentalization, they call it. The idea is that if any single asset is caught, they can only expose themselves, not the cell above them, not the cell beside them. What that architecture does not account for is what it feels like to be the compartment. To be sealed inside a structure with no exits except the one door, and to watch that door go dark. Daniel waited. He checked the app more than he should have. His response, times to normal messages from friends and colleagues, slowed. The woman in Berlin noticed something was off when they spoke and asked him directly if he was all right. He told her he was tired. He was not tired. He was carrying something with nowhere to put it. And then, 8 months after the silence began, the message arrived. 3 lines. Informal Farsi. An apology for the absence. A vague reference to technical difficulties. A question, was Daniel well? Daniel sat with that message for 4 hours before responding. That 4-hour gap is the detail that tells you something about where he actually was by then. Not relief exactly, not suspicion exactly. Something in between, the kind of hesitation that happens when you want something to be true and you are not entirely sure it is, and you are also not sure what it means if it is not. After 4 hours, he responded. I was starting to wonder. And with that, the door was open again. What Daniel did not know, could not have known, had no mechanism to verify, was that Karim had not come back. Karim had been rotated out of the operation months earlier, reassigned or recalled to Tehran. The account left dormant in the way that MOIS often leaves dormant accounts. Not deleted, just quiet. A resource to be reactivated or not, depending on what the network needed. The account had been reactivated, but not by MOIS. The account that Daniel had been responding to for the past 3 weeks. The account that had apologized, that had asked if he was well, that had responded to his messages in the same informal Farsi, at the same cadence with the same precise brevity, was not Karim. Someone else was on the other end of that thread. Someone who had spent months building a detailed model of how Karim communicated before sending a single word. Someone who had read every archived message, mapped every pattern, and then waited for the right moment to become someone Daniel already trusted. Daniel did not know any of this. He knew only that Karim was back, and that the relief he felt was large enough to be embarrassing. There is a second phone somewhere in Vienna's 16th district, probably long since destroyed. Its SAM card extracted and discarded, its data wiped. But if you could recover what was on it, you would find 3 years of a man's parallel life. Tasks completed and confirmed, payments received, check-ins sent and answered, and somewhere near the end of the archive, a 4-hour gap. And then 4 words. I was starting to wonder. The question that should have come next, the question Daniel did not ask, possibly because relief had already closed the door on it, was simple. How do I know you are who you say you are? He did not ask it. And that unanswered question, sitting silently in the gap between what Daniel believed and what was actually true, is where this entire operation lived. For now. The controlled Karim account did not push Daniel immediately. That was deliberate. The first 2 weeks after re-establishing contact were almost entirely routine. Brief check-ins, confirmation that Daniel was still in Vienna, still at the same company, still had the same access. Nothing operational. Nothing that would require Daniel to do anything that might trigger his caution. This patience is not kindness. It is engineering. You do not test a bridge by immediately driving the heaviest vehicle across it. You walk across it first, then you walk across it carrying something. You build the load incrementally, and you watch the structure at every stage for signs of stress. Daniel showed no signs of stress. He responded promptly. His tone was the same as it had always been with Karim, efficient, slightly guarded, professionally compliant. He asked no unusual questions. He made no references to the silence. He had accepted the return as though it had always been inevitable. On day 23 of the controlled operation, The first real tasking was issued. It was calibrated carefully, similar in scope to tasks Daniel had completed before, but with one embedded: anomaly. The target was a mid-level European Union official involved in sanctions implementation. The tasking asked for movement patterns, travel schedules, airport preferences, the kind of logistical profiling that Daniel's work databases made accessible. The official's name was fabricated. Entirely. There was no such person in any EU roster, any sanctions body, any travel database. The name had been constructed specifically to test three things at once: whether Daniel would simply report that he could not find the target, whether he would attempt to access systems beyond his legitimate clearance to find them, or whether he would fabricate results rather than admit failure. The result came back within 48 hours. Daniel could not locate the name. He said so directly, and then he added a line that had not been anticipated. "The name, is the spelling correct? I cannot find this person anywhere, even through secondary sources." Secondary sources. That phrase landed in the team's working environment like a small stone dropped into still water. The ripple it created was disproportionate to its size. Because the model of Daniel that had been built over months of surveillance, the logistics coordinator, the mid-level asset, the man who used his work database access and nothing more, did not include secondary sources. He had never referenced them before. The archive of his communications with the real Karim contained no mention of any research capacity beyond his professional access, which meant one of two things. Either Daniel had developed additional sources since his last major tasking and had not disclosed them to his handler, or Daniel had always had them and had never been asked the right question to surface them. Both possibilities were significant. The first suggested Daniel was operating with more independence than the network's structure was designed to allow. The second suggested that the surveillance operation, thorough as it had been, had not fully mapped him. Either way, the map had a gap in it. The controlled account responded by telling Daniel the spelling was correct and instructing him to continue searching. Then the team spent the next 4 days trying to determine what secondary sources a logistics coordinator in Vienna might plausibly have, and whether any of those sources created an exposure risk they had not previously calculated. They did not fully resolve that question before the next complication arrived. Daniel went to Berlin. No advance notice, no mention to Karim. A Friday afternoon train, a mid-range hotel near Alexanderplatz, booked under his real name, a weekend in a city he had no professional reason to visit. The surveillance extension was scrambled quickly enough. A liaison contact in Berlin was activated. The hotel was confirmed. Daniel was located and held under observation from a distance. He met no one from any known network. He visited a museum on Saturday morning. He ate alone both evenings. Sunday, he walked for nearly 3 hours along the spree without purpose or apparent destination, and sat in a park for almost 2 hours without touching his phone. The team watching him filed a report noting that the subject appeared distressed. Not frightened, distressed. The distinction mattered because a frightened man behaves with urgency. He checks sightlines, he changes routes, he looks for exits. A distressed man goes still. He finds a bench near water and sits with whatever he is carrying. What Daniel was carrying only became clear later. He had gone to Berlin to see the woman he had been quietly involved with for 8 months. She had relocated there for work, and the distance had been slowly compressing whatever remained between them. He had gone to tell her something. Not everything. He did not have the language for everything, and even if he had, telling her everything would have ended more than the relationship. He had gone to tell her enough. Enough for her to understand why he sometimes disappeared, why he carried a second phone, where there were weeks when he was present in body and absent in every other way. She had not responded the way he had hoped. When he returned to Vienna and reopened the app, he sent a message to Karim that no training protocol had prepared the team to receive. "I need to ask you something. Not about work, something else." 12 minutes. That was the window before Daniel would begin to read silence as rejection, or worse, as confirmation of something he was already afraid of. The team had 12 minutes to decide what Karim would say. What they chose was the right call technically, and the most uncomfortable call humanly. The controlled account responded with 4 words. "Of course. Tell me." Daniel wrote for 11 minutes. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared 4 times. Whatever he was composing was long. or it was being revised, or it was being started and abandoned and started again. Then it stopped. He sent 3 words, "Never mind," "Fine," and went offline. The abort discussion happened the following morning. It was not framed that way officially. Officially, it was a risk reassessment. But the word abort was used, and it was used by the person in the room whose judgment carried the most weight, and it was used seriously. The argument was straightforward. Daniel was emotionally unstable in a way that had not been present in the pre-operation profile. An emotionally unstable asset inside an active impersonation. Operation is not just a liability, he is a detonator. If Daniel reached a point where the weight of what he was carrying became unbearable, the most likely failure mode was not betrayal or exposure. It was collapse. A conversation with someone close to him that went further than intended. A moment of desperation that reached outside the network's walls. The Berlin trip had already demonstrated that Daniel was capable of making unilateral decisions that the team had no advance visibility into. The secondary source's comment had demonstrated that the asset map was incomplete. 2 significant gaps had opened in the operations model of its own primary subject within the span of 10 days. The counter-argument was also straightforward. Closing the operation now, withdrawing the controlled account, going silent again, would warn the network. A handler who returns after 8 months and then disappears again after 3 weeks does not read as routine. It reads as exactly what it would be, a detection. Every asset, every relay account, every connected cell would go dark within hours of the withdrawal. The network would not be dismantled. It would simply become invisible again, and the next window might not open for years. The operation continued, but a new instruction was added to the protocol. The controlled account would begin, very carefully, to introduce friction into its relationship with Daniel. Not enough to alarm him, just enough to create emotional distance. The goal was to reduce Daniel's personal investment in the handler relationship, to make Karim feel more like an employer and less like the only person who understood what Daniel's life had become. It was a coldly rational decision. It was also, in retrospect, the decision that created the most significant unresolved cost of the entire operation. Because what it meant in practice was this: a real person, in genuine distress, reaching toward the one relationship that felt stable and the relationship being deliberately made colder in response. Not because of anything Daniel had done, because of what he was being used for. Then came Frankfurt. She had been in the thread the entire time, an account that the team had flagged early as a potential sub-handler relay, communicating through the Karim node in ways that were infrequent and brief. Sophisticated encryption, careful timing, never the same location twice in a week. They had called her the Frankfurt problem. It was a working label. It was also, it turned out, accurate. Because on day 51 of the controlled operation, Frankfurt sent a message to the Karim account that did not fit any pattern the team had modeled. It was not a task request. It was not a check-in. It was not addressed to Karim at all. It was addressed to a name the team had never encountered in the thread. The message was short, formal Persian, 4 lines. The arrangement is being reviewed. Hold current assignments. Confirm receipt only. No additional detail. The team read it twice. Then the senior analyst said the thing that no one in the room wanted to say out loud. Frankfurt was not a subhandler relay. Frankfurt was above Karim. Frankfurt had always been above Karim, and Frankfurt had just issued a stand-down instruction, not to Daniel, not to the visible assets, but to a layer of the network that the team had not known existed until this moment. The operation had been running for 51 days inside a structure it had only partially mapped. And somewhere above Karim, above the thread, above the relay architecture that had seemed to define the network's shape, Frankfurt was reviewing something. The question was whether what she was reviewing was the network, or the account she had been receiving messages from for the past 7 weeks. The decision to respond to Frankfurt's message took longer than any previous decision in the operation. Not because the options were unclear. There were only 3: respond as Karim and risk revealing that Karim did not know who the message was intended for. Stay silent and risk Frankfurt interpreting the silence as confirmation of something she already suspected. Or acknowledge receipt in the most minimal way possible, the way a handler would acknowledge a superior's instruction when there was nothing useful to add. They chose the third option. The controlled account sent 2 words back to Frankfurt. Confirmed, received. Frankfurt did not respond. The silence that followed lasted 9 days. 9 days is a long time inside an active operation. Long enough for the team to run and rerun every possible interpretation of what Frankfurt's message meant. Long enough for 3 separate internal assessments to be written, each reaching a slightly different conclusion. Long enough for the near-abort discussion to happen again, this time lasting nearly 4 hours, and ending not with a clear decision to continue, but with an agreement to continue provisionally, with a 72-hour review window attached. The incorrect assumption that drove the decision to continue was this: the team believed Frankfurt's stand-down instruction was directed inward, that she had detected some kind of operational security risk within the network itself, perhaps a compromised asset, perhaps a leak in a different city, and was issuing a precautionary pause while that risk was assessed. This was a reasonable interpretation. It was consistent with MOIS tradecraft. It was consistent with the message's tone. It was consistent with everything they knew about how Iranian intelligence handled internal security concerns. It was wrong. Frankfurt was not looking inward, but the team would not know that for another 11 days. On day 61, Daniel made contact without prompting. This had happened occasionally in the past. A check-in sent ahead of schedule, a question about timing. But this message was different in register. It was longer than Daniel's usual communications. It read less like an operational message, and more like a man thinking out loud in a direction he could not quite stop. He had been approached, he said, at his company, by a colleague who had asked questions about a specific freight corridor, questions that were professionally adjacent to Daniel's work, but slightly outside his direct remit. The colleague had framed it casually, conversationally, but the specific corridor he had asked about was one Daniel had accessed for a tasking 8 months earlier. One of the last tasks before the silence. Daniel wrote, "It is probably nothing. He is new, but I thought you should know." The team read this message 4 times. The freight corridor detail was the problem, because if a colleague at Daniel's company was asking about that specific corridor, not adjacent corridors, not the general region, but that corridor, there were very few explanations that were comfortable. An internal audit, a coincidence that was genuinely a coincidence, or something else. The something else category was the one the team could not fully close. The controlled account told Daniel he had done the right thing by reporting it. It told him to behave normally with the colleague, not to avoid him, not to engage beyond what was professionally appropriate. It told him this was likely routine and that he should not be concerned. This was the false release moment, and it was constructed deliberately. Not because the team believed Daniel had nothing to worry about, but because an asset who believes a risk has been assessed and dismissed by his handler will, in most cases, exhale. He will return to routine. He will stop examining the thing from every angle. Daniel exhaled. He returned to routine. And the team opened a parallel track to identify the colleague without Daniel's knowledge, without any contact with Austrian authorities that might create a paper trail, and without revealing to Daniel that they were doing it. The parallel track produced nothing definitive. Within the review window, the colleague appeared to be exactly what he appeared to be. A new hire with a professional reason to ask about freight corridors. The access to that specific corridor was explainable through 3 different legitimate business reasons. The team closed the parallel track. They would later revisit that decision. On day 64, Daniel was given a new tasking. The first real operational task since the fabricated official 14 days earlier. This one was not fabricated. The target was a specific shipment, a pharmaceutical consignment moving through a logistics chain that connected a European port to a distribution network with known ties to an Iranian front company operating under EU sanctions. The tasking asked Daniel to confirm routing details, identify the customs broker handling the final clearance, and verify a contact name attached to the receiving end of the chain. It was, by any measure, a significant ask, not because it required Daniel to do anything illegal on its face. He had legitimate access to the databases involved, but because the specificity of the information being requested made the intelligence value obvious. This was not background profiling. This was operational targeting. Daniel completed the task in 31 hours. He sent the results in a format that was more detailed than requested. Names, dates, routing codes. A note about an irregularity he had noticed in the customs documentation that had not been part of the original ask. The note about the irregularity was the false start, because the irregularity Daniel had flagged was real. It was a discrepancy in the declared weight of the shipment versus the routing documentation, the kind of thing a careful logistics coordinator notices and a careless one does not. And in flagging it, Daniel had inadvertently surfaced a detail that the team had not been looking for, but that connected, through a chain of cross-referencing that took the analysts 2 days to complete, to a separate network thread they had been trying to locate for months. For approximately 48 hours, the team believed this was a breakthrough. It was not. The connection was real, but it was historical. The thread it connected to had already gone cold, an asset who had left Europe the previous year, a logistics operation that had wound down. The information was confirmatory rather than actionable. It closed a question that had already been mostly closed. The team had spent 2 days in a controlled state of excitement about information that ultimately changed nothing about the immediate operation. And in those 2 days, Frankfurt moved. She did not send another message to the Karim thread. What she did was subtler than that, and it was only identified in retrospect through forensic reconstruction. She changed her check-in pattern. The infrequent, carefully timed messages that had characterized her use of the thread for months, those stopped. In their place, a new pattern emerged. Shorter messages, more frequent, sent from locations that clustered more tightly than before. She was not moving around less. She was moving around differently, in a pattern that suggested she was operating from a fixed base rather than rotating through a city. She had gone to ground somewhere. Not disappeared, gone to ground. There is a difference. Disappearing means severing contact. Going to ground means maintaining contact from a position of maximum control, minimum exposure. The team had always known Frankfurt was careful. This told them she was more than careful. She had made a decision about her own security posture, and she had made it quietly, without announcing it, without changing anything visible enough to register as a warning sign. She had simply become harder to find while remaining in the thread. The near abort on day 67 was not a discussion. It was a unilateral recommendation from the senior analyst that was overruled by the operational lead. The recommendation was based on a single data point. The change in Frankfurt's pattern, taken in combination with the 9-day silence that had preceded it, taken in combination with the still unresolved question of what secondary sources Daniel had access to, taken in combination with the colleague at his company, meant that the operation was now sitting on at least 4 unresolved variables, any one of which could produce a catastrophic outcome with little or no advance warning. The overrule was also based on a single data point. The customs broker Daniel had identified in the day 64 tasking, the name attached to the receiving end of the sanctions-connected shipment chain, had just appeared in a separate intelligence stream coming from a European liaison partner. Not as a courier, not as a logistics intermediary. As a point of contact for a cell the liaison service had been trying to identify for 14 months. The operation had just handed them a thread that led somewhere real. Closing it now would mean cutting that thread at the moment it became valuable. The operation continued. And on day 69, a message arrived in the Karim thread from an account that had never appeared there before. The message was in formal Persian. It was brief. It was addressed to Karim by name. The courier in Vienna is being watched. Advise immediately. The team had been running the operation for 69 days. They had built a model of the network's structure, mapped its assets, identified its relay architecture, and penetrated its primary communication thread. And they still did not know who had just sent that message. More importantly, they did not know how long that account had been watching before it decided to say something. The team had 3 minutes to decide what to do with the message. Not 3 minutes in the comfortable sense. 3 minutes before Daniel's next scheduled check-in window opened, before Frankfurt's altered pattern brought her back, into the thread, before whatever account had just sent that warning either received a response or began interpreting the silence. 3 minutes where every decision made in the previous 69 days compressed into a single question. Were they being warned or were they being tested? The controlled account responded, understood. What is the source of the information? 4 minutes later, the reply came back. Internal. Do not use the Vienna channel until further notice. And then the account went dark. What happened in the room after that silence is not documented in any way that is publicly accessible. But the operational logic of what followed suggests that the response was not panic, it was speed. Controlled, deliberate, pre-planned speed. Because the one thing the team had prepared for, above all other contingencies, was the moment when the thread stopped being safe. They had a closure protocol. They had always had a closure protocol, they ran it. The message that went to Daniel was 12 words. The operation is done. Destroy everything. Do not contact anyone. Leave tonight. It was sent at 11:23 p.m. Vienna time. It was read within 4 minutes. There was no response. Daniel moved. Whatever he felt reading those words, and the people who have thought carefully about this moment suggest he must have felt something that had no clean name, he moved. He destroyed the secondary phone within the hour. He packed a bag that contained nothing operational, nothing that connected him to 3 years of a parallel life. He left his apartment in the 16th district at 12:09 a.m. Austrian federal police arrested him at Vienna International Airport at 11:40 p.m. before he reached the departures level. The timing is important because Daniel had received the closure message at 11:27. He had not yet left his apartment at 11:40, which means the arrest did not happen because he ran. It happened because the operation's closure protocol included the arrest as a simultaneous action, not sequential. Daniel was not arrested because he fled. He was arrested because the decision to arrest him had been made before the message was sent. The 12 words were not a warning. They were a starting gun. Frankfurt's Telegram account went dark at 11:52 p.m. 13 minutes after Daniel's arrest, 29 minutes after the closure message was sent. 13 minutes is enough time to receive information through a channel the team did not control. It is enough time for someone watching the Vienna channel to notice the cessation of activity and draw the correct conclusion. It is also, depending on what Frankfurt knew and when she knew it, barely enough time to do anything useful. She used it. Her account went dark cleanly, not the way accounts go dark when users are arrested or when devices are seized. It went dark the way accounts go dark when someone who has been prepared for this moment, who has rehearsed it, executes a procedure they have run in their head many times. She was not surprised. That much was clear. The question of when she stopped being surprised, whether it was day 69 or day 51 when she issued the stand-down or earlier, remains unresolved in any document that has been made public. Over the following 72 hours, the collapse moved outward from Vienna in ways that had been partially anticipated and partially not. Assets connected to the broader network, individuals whose identities had been mapped through the relay structure, through metadata gathered across 69 days of penetration, were detained or placed under active surveillance in Germany, the Netherlands, France, and Belgium. 11 individuals total across 5 countries. Some arrested, some placed under long-term monitoring, some simply gone, which, in intelligence terms, is its own category of outcome. The customs broker Daniel had surfaced in the day 64 tasking. The one whose name had appeared in a liaison partner's separate intelligence stream was identified and placed under investigation within 3 weeks of the Vienna arrests. That thread, the one that had been the primary justification for overruling the day 67 near abort recommendation, led to a logistics operation running through 3 European ports. It was dismantled 6 weeks later. So the overrule was, in the narrow operational sense, vindicated. But the colleague at Daniel's company, the new hire who had asked about the freight corridor, was never fully explained. The parallel track that had been opened and then closed on the grounds of insufficient evidence remained closed. The colleague remained in his position. No connection to any known network was ever established through any channel the team had access to. He may have been exactly what he appeared to be, a new hire with a professional reason to ask a professional question. Or he may have been the piece of the map that was never filled in. That ambiguity is the kind that does not resolve. It sits in the file, and it sits in the memory of the people who made the decision to close the parallel track. And it does not become more comfortable with time. The broader strategic consequence of the operation was real, but incomplete in ways that matter. Iran's European recruitment architecture had been built on the assumption that Telegram, used with basic discipline, was effectively opaque, that handlers who rotated out left dead accounts that were operationally inert. That compartmentalization meant the loss of one thread could not compromise adjacent structures. All 3 assumptions were wrong, and the network paid for all 3 simultaneously. But the assumption that was most consequentially damaged was the one about handler continuity. Because what the operation demonstrated was not just that a Telegram account could be taken over, it demonstrated that an asset who has been managed through a single digital relationship who has never met their handler, never heard their voice, never had any verification mechanism beyond the consistency of the communication style, has no reliable way to detect a replacement. MOIS understood this after Vienna. They understood it in the way that intelligence services understand catastrophic failures, not through open acknowledgement, but through the quiet architectural changes that follow. The handler rotation protocols that changed, the verification procedures that were introduced, the shift away from single-channel management that began appearing in operational reports from European liaison services within 18 months of the Vienna arrests. The network that collapsed in those 72 hours was not rebuilt. What was built in its place was different, more cautious, more redundant, more expensive to run. The reach that had taken a decade to construct was gone. What replaced it was smaller, slower, and perpetually aware that the platform it used had already been turned against it once. Daniel was held for 7 months. His cooperation was substantial enough to affect the terms of his situation in ways that have not been made public. What he gave and what he received in return exists in documents that are not accessible. What is accessible, in the way that some things become accessible not through documents but through the shape of what is absent, is the outline of what his cooperation cost him beyond the legal resolution. The woman in Berlin was interviewed by Austrian authorities and released. She had no connection to the network. She had simply been the person Daniel had been trying, in whatever fractured way was available to him, to keep in his life while also being someone entirely different. She has not spoken publicly. The Sunday phone calls to Tehran to his mother, on a schedule so consistent it had become a kind of anchor, stopped. What she was told, and by whom, is not known. The operative whose cover had been used, whose communication style, whose archived messages, whose 3-year relationship with Daniel had been the raw material of the impersonation, was never identified publicly. Whether Karim was a real name, a working alias, or a constructed identity built from the start for disposability, no public record confirms. He may still be operational somewhere. He may have been pulled back to Tehran and reassigned to a network the Vienna operation never touched. He may have been the person who sent the warning on day 69, trying to protect assets that were already beyond protecting. Or he may be someone entirely different from any of those things. That is the nature of a story built on impersonation. Even after the operation ends, even after the arrests are made and the networks are mapped and the debrief documents are filed, the question of who was actually in the room never fully resolves. Someone always knows something that is not in the file. The Telegram account that had been Karim, the one that had apologized for the silence, asked if Daniel was well, and received 4 words of relief in return, was permanently closed the morning after the Vienna arrests. It had existed for the length of an operation. It had been believed for 69 days. And in being believed, it had done what no airstrike and no surveillance satellite could have done alone. It had made 11 people trust the wrong message at the wrong moment. That is what deception at this level actually is. Not cleverness, not technical mastery. It is patience made dangerous. It is the exploitation of the most ordinary human need, the need to believe that the person on the other end of a message is who they say they are. In intelligence work, that need is the oldest vulnerability there is, and it has never been patched.